I'm Claire Parker.
And I'm Ashley Hamilton. And this is Celebrity Memoir Book Club, the podcast where we say, why would you read books when you can talk about books? And so we're reading the books and then talking about the books to you. But if you say, no, I don't like talking, I want to read, then you can go ahead and read Most Talkative by Andy Cohen. But if you say, no, I like the talking about talking, then stick with us, baby, because we're on a wild ride. Watch what happens live.
Sure. Why not?
Claire.
Yeah.
If your life was a memoir, what would you title last week's chapter?
Did I even do anything?
Yeah, you went to like multiple countries.
I went to Uno country, but multiple cities.
Okay, well, I would say the US and Italy counts as multiple. I didn't realize we were in Italy right now.
Okay, this is going to be one that I feel like I say all the time, but with each passing day, I'm weaker than I could have ever imagined.
What did you learn that you can't do now?
Okay, so all I did on vacation was sleep, right? I was getting 10, 12 hours a day, no problem. And then I came back and Italy is 6 hours ahead. So I took like a noon flight. I'd say I took a little nap on the flight. I landed and I went to bed at like 10 p.m., which is 4 a.m. Italy time or something. And then I slept till the next day until like 8. So again, another 10 hours of sleep. I had a headache for like 3 straight days. I'm to this day, and I've been back for 5 days. I'm still jet lagged. I went to bed last night at 9:30. I saw half of the fireworks and said, well, I get the gist. And I plumb went to bed. And I'm just like, what is wrong with me? Because I'm not waking up early on the other side. I'm just a little bit, my skin looks bad. I feel like my tummy hurts. I'm too delicate for the air. I'm too delicate to change night and day. I really was meant to sit still. And I think I need to have like a protein shake or something. Like I feel like I need my own diet, which is made up of a medicinally determined food. Sure. And I need a controlled environment. I'm just wilting by the minute. And Ashley, if you were a celebrity, you were to put a memoir in your chapter of last week, how would it shingle?
You know, I don't think anything would really make the memoir, but I had to talk about a realization I've had that's pretty disappointing.
That's the goal of the year, is to realize stuff.
That's so true. My realization is that like if you have a lot of stuff to get done in the day, you have to start earlier.
No.
I just feel like I've been on a pretty specific schedule with Buggy since we met, where we like about
since
8
you
to 9.
Met Bug.
Yeah, about 8 to 9 a.m. is kind of our morning walk time. And then when I have a lot of stuff to get in before we like meet at the studio at say 11, or if I want to do something at, you know, someone says, do you want to meet here at 10 or whatever? I'm always like, but there's not enough time in the day for me to just do other things. And then I realized before 8 a.m. is still time. Like if you want to do more things, you start earlier and then you can get more things done by 11 a.m. I hate it.
That sucks to hear, man.
I've been like getting my workout in really early. And by really early, I mean at a time that used to be actually quite late for when I had a regular job.
My big thing is that I actually think I have too much time in the day. I think there's too much time in life.
That's
you
so
meet people
true.
in their like 70s whose kids are like up and grown, and you're like, oh yeah, you still have so much life left.
Should we talk about this guy?
Most Talkative: Stories from the Front Lines of Pop Culture by Andy Cohen. This book came out in 1968, it seems. No, that's when he was born. He was born in 1968, and this book came out in 2012. So he would have been 44.
And now he's 56. So I want to state first, people have been asking us to do Andy Cohen for a long time. We looked at his later 2 books, and they are not memoirs. They're just lists of things he does, which is a lot of things, but it's not interesting to cover on a podcast. We also, I think for a while, were like, what can we say about the great Andy Cohen, who we hope someday picks up our TV show? But now I'm like kind of annoyed at him, so I feel comfortable talking about the book. Yeah, I feel like he's pissing me the fuck off with these reunions, and then he also is like a mega Zionist.
He's the biggest proponent of Michael Rapaport, who Ashley, I could see fighting in the street.
I actually told my mom that if I could bury one person alive, it would be Michael Rapaport. And it's true.
Watch out, Michael. This is your warning. So he starts off with my date with Susan Lucci.
So a theme throughout this book, one of the only themes that like really threads this book, I think there are two main things. One, he thinks his hair sucks. And two, he's obsessed with Susan Lucci, the star of All My Children.
I also want to say I saw a photo of the ponytail and I do think his hair sucked at that point.
I do think his hair sucked at that point, but he like continually calls it sucky to this day. He's like, this stupid little fro I've got going on. He calls it a Jew fro constantly. And I'm like, I actually have watched you on TV for hours and hours of my life, and I have never once even thought of your hair. It's just never even occurred to me that he even has any.
I feel like he has good hair.
I feel like it's just the most normal hair.
Yeah, it feels like Avatar hair. Not Avatar the movie, Avatar the way that like if you were to build out an online reflection of yourself, it would be one of the go-to hair options.
Yeah, you'd be like, what does hair on a guy look like?
It's not Lego hair, but it's Avatar hair.
Yeah.
It's emoji hair. Anyway, for those of you who don't know, Susan Lucci is Erica Kane from All My Children. I have to say, I can't even fathom the level of connection that people must have felt towards soap stars.
Yeah.
I guess the closest thing we would have would be the reality TV women. But even so, the level of being in somebody's home every single day, 5 days a week for 41 years.
That's what I was going to say is I think it's just the
What
repetition.
do we have akin to that? Elvis Duran and the Z Morning Zoo, who I stopped listening to as soon as radio stopped being popular. Who do you think is the longest lasting celebrity in your life?
That's hard because I feel like there are like radio and like TV personalities from when I was younger that I like really revered as the most famous person in the world. And then I was like, oh, wow, that really was just like.
Yeah, it's hard to think. Who's consistently putting out material?
Michael Jordan.
No, Shaq.
Okay, yeah.
Because what is Michael Jordan even doing right now? Shaq might be at a Dunkin' Donuts nearby.
That's so true. One time he gave me a Krispy Kreme donut when he was doing a Krispy Kreme donut promotion.
And it was like just at an Irish bar in Midtown, right?
It was actually an Australian bar in Midtown.
Okay, weirder.
I know, because who knew that was a thing?
So there's a man who's always working.
It turns out nobody, it's closed.
Anyway. So I'm standing on the corner of 67th and Columbus Avenue in Manhattan waiting for a meeting that will change my life. It's December 11th, 1987. I'm 19 years old and about to have my first encounter with a celebrity. Not just any celebrity, the queen of daytime, my first diva, Susan Lucci. One thing about him is his whole life, he's always been very chatty and full of chutzpah.
He's adamant.
Yeah, he's somebody who is a fan and he's impassioned and he's gonna ask.
So he had a class at Boston University where the teacher said, try to get an interview with your idol. And if you get a good one, maybe it'll be on the cover of our newspaper.
I think they said it would just be in the newspaper.
Sure. Somewhere in the newspaper.
So he wrote to Susan Lucci's publicist, which is, I will say, I don't know that at 18, 19, I would have even thought to do that. Even pre-internet, I don't know how you get a phone number for such a person.
Yeah, he wrote to the publicist and was like, hey, I've got Susan Lucci for the cover of the Boston University newspaper. And after like months of rescheduling, he got the interview.
He was also there interviewing people for his thesis. Is Pine Valley, which is where All My Children was filmed, like the fictitious town of All My Children, is it an accurate reflection of society? And he said that all of them were like, no. That is such a silly topic for an essay that a 19-year-old would be like, wait a minute, is this so deep? And you're like, no, it's made up. Is Space Jam an accurate reflection of the NBA?
Okay, not the NBA, but I would say the world, yes.
Society?
I would say the way the Monstars come down from their mountaintop and take advantage of the powers of talented unknowns.
It's Reaganomics.
Yeah, literally. Oh my God.
I've never seen that movie.
It's a movie?
Space Jam?
Oh, I thought Reaganomics.
Anyway, so he meets up with her. She's very kind to him, very teeny tiny, which I do think is my favorite thing. This is a real, whenever my mom sees a celebrity in New York City, she's always that. She's like, they're child-sized. And I feel like that was a real my mom comment. He's like, I saw Susan Lucci and the first thing I could think is, she's the size of a child. And then he got over it. And then they went to have Mexican food and she was very nice to him and answered all of his questions. And he says later he listens back to the recording, like years later, he listened back to the recording of this first ever celebrity interview he did. And he's like, wow, I'm interrupting her constantly. I won't stop talking about my mom. I'm asking her questions about her character and then being like, well, what me and my mom think is.
That's so funny. And also like, people don't think interviewing is a skill. And it's a very, very difficult skill that most people never learn because when you do some bad interviews, you think, well, this just isn't for me.
Have we done bad interviews?
No, not us. We've never done bad interviews. We've never interrupted anybody, actually. I think the hallmark of Clashly, people always say one remarkable thing about these two is that they've never done any interrupting. However, this is very cute that he looks back at it and was like, oh yeah, I sucked then. And boy, oh boy, I don't know. There was something very sweet to me about the way this paved the way for like the rest of his fucking life. But there was like a 20-year detour. Well, not even a detour, a 20-year
walking towards
down a longer and windier road.
Anyway, he gives her a sweatshirt. She acts like it's the greatest gift someone could have given her. I mean, it is interesting to see like stars and how they operate.
I do wonder if that was a really great gift. Like how many interviewers are giving her a little present afterwards, especially like a soft sweatshirt.
I mean, it has to be sweet to see this kid who is obviously gay in the 80s before it's like super allowed. And he's like obsessed with you and near tears getting to ask you these questions and so genuinely impassioned to meet you. And he has a little gift. I mean, why would you be a dick?
Like at the end of the day, it's a lunch for her. Like I get that she's a busy person, maybe, but like, why not just enjoy the lunch? And she did.
So then he gets into his childhood and he says, interestingly enough, commenting on the entire genre of the memoir, I hate hearing about other people's childhoods. Unless you Mackenzie Phillips your way through high school, chances are I won't care about your first kiss. I promise that part won't be long and I will try to make it relatively painless like my childhood itself. And I'm not writing about my first kiss. It was uneventful and with a girl and that's all you need to know.
So he goes through his childhood. He was a chatty person. He was kicked off the water polo team for chatting too much.
He had this crazy story actually about taking the long drive he's from St. Louis, which he's very proud of. He fucking hates when people shit on the Midwest. He loves St. Louis. But he takes this trip with his aunt, uncle, and cousins, and they're driving to Sarasota, which is obviously such a long trip. And he comes up with this game that only he's playing where he narrates the entire car ride.
Using his hairbrush as a microphone, he like is doing play-by-play of the car ride.
Like mile markers. He says he's calling out every mile marker, which if you remember from the last time you were in a car on a highway, that's like 1 a minute. Just like counting down.
When we're going 60 miles an hour and there's a mile marker every mile.
Yeah. What did I say?
No, you're right. But it's not like 1 per minute. It fully is. You're right.
Yeah, but you don't know about variation in speed.
Oh, yeah. Traffic.
I did that female thing where I said like, not because I thought I was approximating it, because I wanted to soften how smart I was.
Okay.
I didn't want anybody to be overwhelmed by my quick math.
And I said, whelm them.
If you're going 60 miles down a highway, you're seeing a mile marker every minute on the minute. That's a promise. That's the physics. And if you're scared of me, I don't give a fuck. I can't help it that I know 60 divided by 60 is 1. Thanks for giving me the
confidence.
Yeah.
To proceed.
I feel bold like a woman. Anyway, back to the story that he told.
So they're driving.
And they obviously get really sick of it. My aunt Judy expressed her displeasure not by saying, shut up, stop talking to the hairbrush, which I totally would have understood. No, my aunt, my own flesh and blood by marriage, dumped an entire pitcher of iced tea over my head. Okay, maybe she had asked me to shut up for the love of God once or twice, but maybe she should have said it more like she meant it. Anyway, I was shocked. I sat and sulked in the backseat for the rest of the trip to Sarasota. That is so funny.
Dump iced tea on a
child. I will say, dire situations call for dire measures.
Yeah, I do wonder how many times she asked.
And I do think this is the hallmark of like what is good about this book, but also what is tricky about this book, but also what I think probably is Andy Cohen to his core, which is there's not a ton of depth in this book, but it is self-deprecating enough. And I do think these little stories are like funny enough that you get to the end and you don't really notice the lack of true introspection. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because I don't know that there was anything to truly introspect on. And maybe that's just because he didn't give us even a nugget to chew on. But I think that for the most part, when we read a book where someone is like trying to hide the truth of their trauma or their like the thread that started this personality that we're like untangling, they'll tell a story that's so weird that it sticks out, or we're like, well, there's the thing that you won't dive into. This one, I'm not saying that he's not deep. I'm just saying I don't think
he sits around thinking about stuff.
I don't think there's much to pick apart. I think that this is the whole story. Like not everyone has trauma or these like harrowing secrets.
I guess what it is it's like sincerity. Do you know what I mean? It's like he is so good at the self-deprecating, kind of glib, funny, self-aware at a party type persona that he doesn't ever need to be like deeply sincere. And maybe there are a few moments, but it is quite a quick little beach read. I was thinking of comparable books, maybe a Seth Rogen, and that one really did bug me. This one I felt was
Well, because that one had the thing where you're like, well, you're telling us these things to deflect from a proper story.
Well, I think that one to me just felt so like I didn't even think twice about this book. I wrote down the top 10 stories that came to mind.
Like to not even admit that you're just like a regular person doing cool shit now.
I don't know. It was funny. I did find him likable in this book.
Me too. Nothing feels overtly shocking or like a bombshell, or there's no deep truth, but there's no big lie.
I think it's paced quickly enough that's like skipping rocks or something. You're never somewhere too long to sit and get annoyed.
Yeah.
Anyway, his big problem at the time is being like, does our condo in Sarasota have 2 TVs? Because Judy and my cousin love to watch Days of Our Lives, which he thinks sucks. And he's an All My Children guy and they come on at the same time. And what if he has to miss out on a week of Erica Kane's nonsense?
Would be devastating.
So he just like loved TV and he loved his idols and he loved his family. He was from a very close-knit family where his aunt and uncle and cousins lived nearby and he was always performing. And he hated sports and he wasn't really forced to do it. And it sounds like he just had like a really great childhood. He talks about how he had jobs from the time he was 10. When he was 10 years old, he was a newspaper boy and he was always interning. I think he just like lived this great upper middle class, maybe even full on upper class Midwest life.
Yeah. He loved his parents. They loved him. He went to overnight camp. He has a bunch of letters from him and then from his mom back and forth. He's obsessed with making his parents see Grease. That's kind of it.
He has a crush on Eric Estrada when he's little. He kind of, as soon as he's aware of sexuality, he has this looming understanding that he's gay.
Oh, well, that's the big thing. That's the looming thing from his child. Like everything's good except for that he's like quite stressed about that.
Not immediately though.
Yeah.
He says, you know, he would be in the locker room and he'd be like, okay, I'm feeling something and I know that that's what I'm feeling and I'll just deal with it later.
Most of his best friends were women. He had a lot of really close friendships.
He seemed very popular. I think he ended up being voted class president, most talkative and most popular, but not best dressed.
Yeah, he was sad about that. But then later when he's describing outfits that he was putting together, I was like, oh, there's no way you were best dressed or even well dressed.
He comes from a food canning fortune. Allen Foods. You guys know about it? 3 generations of Cohens just putting tops on bottles. Those bottles full of food.
So Jackie Greenberg is one of his best friends growing up. And Jackie and her mom, they've pretty much identified that Andy is gay and they're the only ones who have ever even mentioned it. At one point, they're kind of laughing about it. And he's like, well, you have to tell me what you're laughing about. And that's the first time that he has to kind of acknowledge out loud that that is the truth. They're correct. He is gay. And he says, it was not freeing to know I was gay. It was tragic. Even at that age, I had an inkling of the tough road that might lie ahead for someone like me. At that point in our culture, there were Black heroes, women heroes, Latino heroes, but there were no homosexual heroes. And there just wasn't representation on television really of gay people living their lives.
But he still has a great time.
Oh, yeah.
But it's always known. He says like his friend Jackie's parents go away for a vacation and they ask Andy to stay with her because they deem her safe. And his parents are like, well, why would you, a boy, be safe with their daughter?
Why isn't that girl's
parents afraid you're going to rape her? And then he has like an experience where they go to see Eddie Murphy perform stand-up and the entire set is basically making fun of gay people and using the F word. And he's there on shrooms and he kind of has a panic attack and runs to the bathroom because he's been watching all of his friends like laugh at gay people knowing that he's gay. They don't, well, I guess they do know he's gay, but he's in there like having a panic attack and he says, watching my friends cheer Murphy on that night reinforced my secret fear that homophobic bigotry was perfectly acceptable. It also reinforced that I should never do mushrooms again, and I haven't.
Oh my God, that's not what mushrooms are like.
I wish he could try again. I will say there's a lot of times in this book where he's like, and I hate that drug. I don't do cocaine. I would never do that. And I'm like, okay, maybe he has done mushrooms again. Maybe when he says in this book that he never does something again, it's like a joke.
Yeah.
Maybe in the same way, do you remember when John Mulaney was like, yeah, I was addicted to drugs at that point, but never on the NBC floor.
I was
doing drugs 24/7 that fall, but not when I hosted SNL and not when I was writing.
Froggy Doggy Castle was a sober thought.
Yeah, maybe he has to be like, yes, I did drugs this 1 minute, but never again. NBC Universal hates drugs.
My trench coat and sunglasses on live national television was something that I chose on purpose. So then he goes to Boston University. His best friend is his roommate, or they're randomly assigned as roommates. And they become best friends forever. But then his best friend seems kind of homophobic. So he just is like, it's actually crazy that I know everything about him and he knows not a single thing about me because I can't trust him. Anyway, we're best friends.
As the months passed, I often wondered, would he ever be ready to hear it? And would I ever be ready to tell?
He kind of thinks he might never tell people. And then he goes to Europe for a semester abroad.
And he has French sex with a dude named Jean-Marie, which is life-changing.
Yeah.
Go to Europe, meet a man who doesn't speak your language, make love to him, come back different. That's what I recommend all the youth of America do.
I agree.
So he's in London working this internship that he thinks sucks, but he's having a lot of fun and going out to gay clubs and kind of living this double life. And he's having a hard time being honest with everybody because also everyone thinks he's in love with his friend Graciela. Everybody thinks that. And so he finally comes out to one friend.
Including Graciela.
Yeah, she thinks they're going to end up together. So he finally comes out to his one friend and then is met with nothing but support from her and her boyfriend. And so he slowly, one by one, keeps telling all of his friends until he finally gets home and he tells his mom and then his dad. And they are both quite supportive. I mean, his mom kind of has some questions, but very quickly she's like, well, I would have hated your wife anyway, so it's for the best. His dad does this weird thing where he keeps listing all of Andy's female friends and being like, so if she came in here naked and rubbed her body on you naked, you wouldn't get turned on.
And Andy is like, I mean, maybe if I was blindfolded, but probably not.
And then the next day, his dad takes him to Steak and Shake to talk to me about AIDS and condoms. It was as awkward as any conversation about AIDS that Steak and Shake could possibly be, but it only made me love him more than I ever thought I could before, and it more than made up for the time he didn't get me reinstated on the water polo team.
So then he tells his roommate, and finally he's really made the rounds, and everyone's cool.
The road ahead for once seemed open and smooth. I finally felt free.
So his plan in life was to move to a small market and become an on-air reporter and work his way up in broadcasting. Because the way it tends to work in broadcasting is you get a job in a small market and you kind of just skip around to bigger and bigger markets until you're the host of the CBS Evening News in New York City.
For more on that, check out our episode on
Katie Couric. So he gets an internship at CBS in New York, and he has to choose it over an internship at a St. Louis station. And they're like, you'll regret going to New York and working at CBS for the rest of your life. And that turns out to just not be true. However, he's interning on the CBS Morning News, not the CBS Evening News. The Morning News is not as prestigious.
And then he's put on the consumer unit, which I actually don't even know what that is, under Erin Moriarty. And he's so offended that he talks back and is essentially like, no, I want to be on the good one. He wanted to work on the entertainment unit. But he obviously gets slapped down. A big problem he has at the beginning is feeling too big for his britches. He has to learn some humility at this first internship. Some girl in the internship class is rolling her eyes at what a brown noser he is and how much better he thinks than everybody. And he's like, oh, this girl, she keeps leaving at 5 p.m. to hang out with her boyfriend. She'll never go anywhere in this industry. And guess who it was? Julie Chen. It turns out having her boyfriend be the head of CBS is actually so helpful.
Anyway, so he is having a great time as an intern. He's always there. He's always involved. If anyone asks him to do anything, he'll do it except transcribe. He gets asked to transcribe by Erin Moriarty and he goes, I don't transcribe. And she goes, learn. You do now. That's crazy that he said that. So then he has some meetings. He's really good about taking higher ups to lunch and asking for advice and things like that. And one of them is you have to act better.
Yeah, somebody finally sits him down and goes, listen, people really like you. You're good at what you do, but the problem is your attitude sometimes, the way you're too familiar with the higher ups, the way you're too familiar with clients, the way that you talk back. If you want to go far, a lot of people are pissed. A lot of people are not going to ask you back because of these attitude problems. And if you want to go far in this industry or even be asked back for next year, you got to get in shape. And he says he goes out for a drink and off the top of his head can think of 3 instances where he was deeply inappropriate at work. And he realizes, okay, I'm going to go back and be professional and try my hardest. He's also so ballsy. I think one of the great secrets of Andy Cohen's success is the way that he can network without making it obvious that that's what he's doing. He goes up to this woman, Lynn, who's very successful. She was a senior producer on the show who had been around the industry for a while. And he goes up to her and says, can we be friends? Friends, I can still hear her incredulous, high-pitched responses though I was asking for her pancreas. She was older and married and living in Connecticut. And here was this gay college kid knocking at her cubicle door with a promise ring in his hand. She didn't even pretend to let me down gently. You're an intern, she said point blank. I don't see the common ground. You're 20.
Fair, but now they're really good friends. So after he gets told to tone it down, he starts really hustling. He's there for everything.
He just gets addicted to the news cycle. He doesn't understand when a big late night thing is happening.
How anyone could go home. There was a plane crash and he was just like, okay, I'll stay. I'm going to keep on lining shit up. I'm going to be involved.
And he books a firefighter from this plane crash to come be on the show. And he gets this rush of adrenaline. He loves the way that there's a buffet out and people stay up late and you hut too. And he really like loves the high of breaking news.
So then he sits down with someone about maybe someday being on air, and they go, your wandering eye will keep you from any on-air career. And he's like, my what?
He had no idea. And he calls his mom and she goes, that's just bull, Andy. What the hell is he talking about, wandering eye? I've never seen it. You do not have a wandering eye. Get over it.
And that was pretty much it. I believed her. For 20 years, I pursued a career behind the scenes, but because that's what I ultimately decided I wanted, and not because I was thinking about some non-existent lazy eye. And then when someone actually let me be on TV, boy, did I hear about it. Every blogger, tweeter, and commenter that encountered me on air had something to say about my wonky eyes. I didn't realize he had like a wandering eye. I thought he just had like beady eyes.
I'm sure he'll be happy to know.
I didn't notice that they were going different ways. I thought that they just looked like little snake eyes.
Okay, good. Keep going. Do you have another descriptor?
I think your hair looks normal. He leaves his internship for the summer and they go, we're keeping your mailbox up. We know you'll be back.
So he goes back to school. He's fully out. He's so excited that he has this job back in New York City, but now he has to handle the AIDS crisis and the fear he has of getting AIDS. He says he wouldn't even get tested for a while because he was just like, didn't even want to know. But he went back and he got some small job at CBS This Morning. News clerk. I hated the sound of it. The clerk part was what bugged me. But then again, look at what I was doing. I answered phones, ripped scripts, collated packets for the anchors, and did irritating grunt work for producers, some of whom seemed to me like Michelangelos or the mediocre.
So then he moves up and becomes an assistant producer. And throughout the next couple of years, he works his way up to
senior producer. I think by the time he's like 24, he says.
That's crazy.
So he had been really hustling, but I have to say the CBS morning show is a distant third. They're not really even in contention. And as he's working there, they fall lower and lower in the ratings.
They're a distant third when there are 3 shows. And as more shows get invented, they go further and further down.
But what he's producing are at first sort of these like little feature segments where he says he's parachuting into stories, parachuting into lives that would land smack dab in the middle of someone else's drama before disappearing forever. I became a professional voyeur. I had a walk-on role in everyone else's soap opera. And so he like learned what makes good TV, what makes characters and people and stories pop in just a few minutes. And he does like the Badafuku story. And he talks about he produced the segment where she brought out her x-ray that showed the bullet in her head.
And he's like, that's when I learned props are awesome.
He's like, and you'll see a lot of props later on at reunions. And that's where I learned they're so good.
He also talks about how he genuinely like connects to these people. He's not just jumping in and trying to pull out a great story and then leaving. He thinks about a lot of these stories and segments he's produced and the people he's met for a long time. And he has this like little, do they still think about me moment, which I feel like sounds goofy, but I do believe it. And I believe that that's what made him the king of the housewives.
Because you have to be genuinely invested. You can't only look down on them. You have to like believe in what they're doing.
Like he's not watching them as a story. He's living in that story and thinking about it from every angle. And he's excited to like cultivate it and see what happens next.
So he interviews Tammy Faye Baker, I think her name is. I don't know if it's Backer or Baker. It's a double K. I've never seen such a thing. Huh. But she made him fudge and he kept that fudge for like 10 years in his freezer. He never even tried it. He just had it as a memento of something that meant a lot to him.
Then he tells this long story about how he used to love pranks until him and Graciela played a prank on his mom that he was like, that was maybe mean.
Okay. I hate pranks. I don't get them. I don't think they're funny. I don't think it's funny to like lie to somebody and then be like, haha, you reacted as if it was true.
LOL, you trusted me, a person you trust, idiot.
I hate that shit. I'm very anti-prank. But I don't know, this story was so weird. So like the pranks he's always pulling on his parents is he'll be on the phone with them and then just basically lie about what's going on. He'll say something like, oh no, a banana got in all my clothes in the washer machine. And his mom will be like, what do you mean? And it's like, pranked, got your ass.
There was no banana.
Why is that a prank? Why would you even think to do such a thing?
So he convinces his mom he thinks he's a Native American.
That he met one of Graciela's friends and they're from like the Shawnee tribe and they look so much alike and he's getting all invested in like their history. I guess he's kind of insinuating that someone in his family had an affair. If not his mom, then his grandmother. Somebody has had an affair and he is part Shawnee. And he like keeps it going for months. And his mom starts to think he's insane. And she's like, okay, you have to like, this isn't who you are. And he's like, I can't believe you won't accept me as Native.
So then she starts accepting it. She's like, I guess he is.
She's like, well, you know, I guess my mom could have. Maybe your dad's mom, you know, I don't know. It was a long time ago. And then to like hit the prank home, they send a fake box to the parents' house and pretend that he had bid $300 on a pair of like Shawnee shoes and all these books. Like he was investing in paraphernalia, and she gets all upset about how much money he spent. But then it turns out she's telling people around town, and everybody's like, actually, that's quite valuable. If you got them for $300, that might be a great investment. Like, you know, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, artifacts like that could go for way more. And so she's calling him being like, apparently it was a really good idea. And like, these are really worth something.
So then he gets to be like, you're pranked.
And rightfully so. They're like, why
did you do that?
6 months you've been doing this. Why? My mom was as still as a painting. I did not have an answer. I mean, why? Was it funny? Why did you do this? Then my mom's face turned. One thing about my mom, she appreciates a good joke. Then my father left the room without saying a word. On that day, the art of the prank more or less died for me. I had gotten such pleasure from the whole thing, but my father's quiet disappointment erased it all. I will say, like, what is a prank? Like, I kind of get it because I'll say shit just to fuck with my mom sometimes, but like, I don't get this prank because it's like nothing's happening. And I guess later his mom is like, I don't know, man. I thought you were genuinely losing it. You were like obsessing over this culture and thinking you were a part of this group of people that you just were not a part of. It was weird.
Yeah.
He says that his parents hate his friend Graciela.
They don't trust her anymore because she lied to them for 6 months.
Yeah, that and other stuff. Like she was always on the other line of the phone when he was saying crazy things like, Graciela put a banana in my pants and then I put my pants in the wash, and they'd be like, be your own man. Stop doing what she tells you. I'm like, that's fair enough.
Yeah, based on all of your pranks, Graciela seems like a fucking loon.
So then he talks about working at CBS.
News gets intense.
He was on the scene for hurricanes, floods, fires, plane crashes, and the aftermath of a bombing.
My emotional disconnect from the stories I was covering was nothing new, but the realization that I was getting better at the disconnect was disturbing. It wasn't that I didn't feel anything, it's that I was growing more and more able to put aside the human faces of my stories for the stories themselves.
Flying in, helicoptering out as fast as I could. I didn't know how long I could sustain it. So he's still like covering all of these natural disasters. And like the name of the game is you get there as fast as possible. You find somebody willing to talk. Tells a story about a fire that's going on in LA, I guess Laguna Beach. And they tried to find a firefighter to talk about it. And he's like, well, they're all busy because they're fighting the fire that's still raging. He's like, luckily I found this man whose house burnt down. And then the news truck had moved. So I'm taking this poor man whose house has just burned down. He's lost everything on this wild goose chase to find the news truck. And he's furious with me. And he's like, yeah, I get it. I don't like the way that you just go in and you have to turn off your feelings because you have to deliver this story. I actually thought that was like an interesting insight.
Yeah, me too.
The way that would wear on you. Not even so much like taking in the pain of it all, but what it takes to like reject the pain.
Yeah, but still acknowledge it enough to like distill that pain into a compelling story.
And then feeling competitive and exploitive. I feel like we actually also read that in the Katie Couric thing, the way that something horrible happens, it's like a rush to who gets to go cover the story.
Yeah.
So then he talks about his relationship with Oprah. And I think that this is some of the great
filler.
Yeah, that's a good word. I was going to say regrets of his life, but filler is a good word too.
He kind of fudges the truth about what kind of story he's going to get on with Oprah. And then Oprah's team is like, what the fuck? This is
He doesn't
Oprah.
just fudge the truth. He lies.
Yeah.
So he asks for her to come do an interview for this series he's doing about talk show hosts. And she's so beyond talk show hosts at this point that like for her to get on there and be next to like Geraldo and Rosie O'Donnell is like preposterous. But they agree to a separate one-off interview. And he basically tells the anchor, we're going to tell her we're cutting the camera. We're not really going to cut. You just casually ask these questions and we'll get our second interview. When the assistant PR person realizes what's going on, the publicist, she shuts it down. Oprah calls him from her limo and is like, I'm very disappointed that you would do that after we explicitly told you I wouldn't do that interview. But because the interview went well, I will let you use the footage. And he's like, this was early 90s Oprah. So she was still like on her rise to the top. He's like, if it had been 3 or 4 years later, when she didn't have to fucking take shit from anybody, I don't know what would have happened. I might have been like...
He would have been sent to Siberia.
I mean, it was a fireable offense, I think, to disrespect Oprah that way.
Yeah. But then he like goes in about the other times he's met or been near Oprah, which I don't know needed 20 pages.
Yeah, another time he like goes to watch the show live and he's like, hi, I'm a producer from CBS. And somebody at CBS had just made fun of her weight loss. And so she was like, well, I fucking hate your network. I don't think she said that. You know her. She's got tact, but she did not say that. She was like, I hate that network. And then his third interview with Oprah, he had just gotten a haircut, a famous haircut. He got a haircut from this guy, Christoph. If you're a bit older than me, you'll probably remember this. No offense. It happened in like 92 or something, or maybe 96. But apparently Bill Clinton famously got a haircut on a tarmac, and I guess it shut down an airport for a little bit. And I get why that was news. I feel like you couldn't get away with that today. That's like pretty bad PR.
Yeah.
It's a bad look for the president of the United States to be like,
shut the airport down. I need my hair trimmed.
Just cut his hair on the plane, no? Anyway, that guy cut Andy's hair, and they got to do a before and after makeover on TV with him. And then later he got to interview Oprah, and it was the highlight of his life. Good for him.
Yeah. And then he gets pulled away right away to go cover the Oklahoma City bombings.
And at the time, he's like, I don't want to go. I'm here at Oprah. Like, is it even that important? And then he gets there and sees how big of a deal it is. And he says, my Oprah Angel Network Book Club aha moment regarding this experience is something I still haven't really learned and maybe never will. Sometimes it's not about you, not one little bit. So I do think that those kind of moments are what balance this book.
Yeah.
I was not mad at it. I was compelled the whole time because I think there are these moments of being like, I kind of fucked up here. Can you imagine getting a call saying to cover this story and you think being in the audience that Oprah is more important than a tragedy?
Yeah, and I think this next chapter about the Oklahoma City bombings was one of the best in the book, where he talks about spending several days out there just not sleeping, shooting footage, putting together a segment, producing a segment. We cut 3 segments a day, which meant going into the field, talking to people on camera, coming back, screening the tape, writing the script, working with an editor to put it all together, advising on shots and sound, alone in my motel room. So after he'd had a couple of days of just nonstop work, he finally breaks down when he realizes the gravity of the event that he's been covering. And then he talks about 9/11. I thought that this was like really fascinating and devastating, where he says, you know, he lived in New York City on 9/11, and he talks about the aftermath in the city. And as he's walking around looking at the posters that family members have hung up, like looking for their missing relatives who had gone to work that day.
Here's why I'm telling you this now. If it was even remotely possible to feel grateful for one thing about 9/11 besides just being alive, it was that I didn't have to find the people who had hung those flyers and interview them about whether or not they still held out any hope. I didn't have to sit in an editing bay trying to make a piece work, looking for that certain something that would elevate it over someone else's 9/11 pieces. This time I was just another New Yorker. I was just another person. And while I had never felt worse before, at least I didn't have to try not to.
That was like the most beautiful sentence in this book, I think. I was like, wow, that really does encapsulate, because we do need news.
Yeah, we do need, and I think it was actually really interesting. I know we read Kitty Couric's book, like 2.5 years ago, I think maybe. So it's loose, but I remember not liking it because I had such a sense of she had to like tell you about every incredible moment she was privy to. And when you're one of the foremost news anchors in America, you're going to be privy to a lot. I was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't need to read this book. I watched the news already. I know about you being there. I saw it the first time. I felt like his talking about his time in news was less about like, look at all these things I was front row to, and more like, here's what the experience of covering that news is like, which is much more interesting in a memoir. Because I don't need to like have it all rehashed a second time.
Because also that's not what happened to him. Like the attack didn't happen to him. The covering it happened to him.
Yes, his experience as the coverage. I also think it's interesting to juxtapose with what he's doing now. Because I know, of course, there's a lot of love for the Bravo housewives, but there's a lot of criticism. He's accused, right or wrongfully so, of exploiting these women constantly. And I wonder if coming from his news background, he's like, I don't know. I used to go find people who had just lost their houses and beg them to more or less be entertaining for the world, be like, exploit your trauma. These are women begging to be shown to the world. And what's their big trauma? I mean, there are real traumas in the Real Housewives, but for the most part, it's that like everybody thinks you're ugly and stupid and poor. Like that's not a
yeah. What's the core trauma that your friend has a bigger house than you?
Yeah, like I do see how after coming out of that background, this idea that he's being exploitive to these women who are like desperate and begging. And at the end of the day, being quite trivial often. Yeah. I'm sorry that your made up cookbook didn't take off. I guess you shouldn't have pretended that there was a cookbook when there wasn't one. It's so hard to sell a cookbook that doesn't exist. That's so your own fault. That's different than a school bombing.
This next chapter was not one that I think we need to cover. He like did backup dancing for the B-52s.
Actually, I will share this moment because I did think that was so funny. So him and his best friend, Graciela, his partner in crime, as you'll say, were told they were going to be allowed to do this. They had like met the manager at somewhere and he said, you pick a show on tour and I will let you go on stage and dance with them. And he's like, we talked about it all summer. This was like the only thing we cared about. We spent hours and days and weeks practicing our moves. We rented outfits. They picked a date on Graciela's 30th birthday. She spent 4 hours getting her hair done. I mean, they literally like rented costumes. They were like, we were at our own wits' end. We had bored ourselves talking about it so much. And they get to the concert and they're like, nobody's in the parking lot, like literally not a car. And then they go up to a police and they're like, oh yeah, the concert was canceled. Why don't you know that?
Oh, and then I forgot the other thing that's happening during this chapter is he has like a red bump on his chest that turns out to be a tick bite.
He's like, yeah, I had this weird bite on my stomach. He was like, it was a giant red splotch with a huge red circle around it, and it kept changing shapes and hurt and wasn't getting better. So we went to a TV doctor, and he's like, do you know what this is? And they're like, yeah, spider bite, no big deal. And his mom kept being like, go to the fucking doctor.
It turns out he had Lyme's disease all summer.
And he's like, isn't it crazy that like 95% of what TV doctors warn you about is Lyme's disease? And then here I had Lyme's disease, and the TV doctor didn't even think about that. I will say the minute he said red splotch with a red circle around it, I was like, well, that's exactly one thing. And Yolanda Hadid has another interesting book.
Yeah, if you want to learn more about it. It was also just so funny to me that Yolanda Hadid wrote an entire book about like the trials and tribulations of Lyme's disease. And Andy Cohen's book is like, anyway, I'm trying to find a way to be a backup dancer for the B-52s. And there's this bump, and then there wasn't a bump. Anyway, the B-52s.
Well, the thing about Lyme's disease is it is curable
by the B-52s.
Yeah, you need a little doctor dance.
You head on down to the Love Shack and see if a rock lobster can cure you up.
I would love to see the B-52s.
Me too.
Anyway, he got to dance for them a couple more times. So, I don't know. His life has just been a series of like
getting to do everything.
Is that like a fair thing to say? He's 30 years old. He has this incredible job producing for CBS. He's flying all over the world, breaking every story. Him and his best friend are dancing for the B-52s. At this point in time, I think his best friends were already Sarah, Jessica Parker, and Amy Sedaris. Like, I just think he knew every famous person. He went to the very first Vanity Fair's Oscar party. He was just like a man about town already.
I think that his whole life has been getting exactly what he wants, and even things he didn't even know he could get. And I think the lesson is, if you don't ask for things, you'll never get them.
I sometimes wonder if Oklahoma City precipitated a shift in the nature of American news. As our world became more somber and scary, the news got lighter, fluffier, more vapid. Over time, Paris the city would become less newsworthy than Paris the Hilton. You probably think I, of all people, snorted it up like a line of fine Colombian cocaine, but I hate cocaine. Okay. Well, then why did you bring it up? You were like, you'd probably think I loved this the way I love, I don't know, drugs I'm accused of doing all the time.
But I don't.
Nobody even asked you to bring coke up.
I guess the thing is, I do believe he hates cocaine. I believe he was writing this book being like, oh, I hate that cocaine, that drug that I did last night. That's making writing so much harder.
Yeah. I believe that he doesn't like it, but he needs it.
I believe he does it a lot.
Do I like cocaine? No. Am I biologically addicted to it? Absolutely. It's a different thing.
I believe he hates cocaine, but he does cocaine as much as people who love cocaine.
You know what Roald Dahl said? If you wake up every day and write on the days you feel like writing and write on the days you don't feel like writing, in a year you'll look back and you won't be able to tell the difference. That's Andy Cohen doing cocaine. He does cocaine even when he doesn't feel like it. Okay, so this chapter is also kind of boring. No offense to Dan Rathers. He got to go interview Don Imus in Wyoming with Dan Rathers.
And he says weird shit's always happening to Dan Rather. And he thought that he was off the hook, but he wasn't.
He said Dan Rather was so nice to him and told him a lot of things, like about how fucking viciously competitive Barbara Walters was. He said like any question I asked, he answered. And he took a photo of me for my mom. And then the cameraman took a photo of Dan Rathers taking a photo of me for my mom. And he's like, that's pretty iconic. And then they did the interview, and on their way home, their plane stalled and they had to get a second private plane. And he said, how great is my life? I'm having a Diet Coke with Dan Rather. Diet Coke, sure.
Less cocaine than usual because he's on a diet.
He's at work, so just enough to keep you alert, not enough to make you want to dance. The right amount of cocaine at work is just enough to make you productive, but not so much that you have a new idea for a business. You want to do cocaine so that you get all your faxes right, but not cocaine so that you're like, I'm actually going to disrupt the system.
A fax machine, but make it upside down in blue.
It's so clear you've never done cocaine.
I know. I don't know what it's like. What do boobs feel like? Sand?
Anyway, I don't even remember what I was talking about, but
wait, I need to talk about this other thing from this chapter. So he talks about interviewing Nicholas Sparks right before The Notebook came out, and Nicholas Sparks became a household name. And when he was getting B-roll footage, he caught footage of Nicholas Sparks getting the phone call that his dad had died.
Yeah, so he did this documentary series called 48 Hours, which reminds me of like
24 hours?
No, 36 hours.
60 minutes.
So he was working for this show, documentary series called 48 Hours, where you spend 48 hours with somebody right before they do something. So Nicholas Sparks was about to put out this book called The Notebook. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. And Andy Cohen had read it and been like, I think this could be a hit. Let's follow this guy around for 2 days.
So this was after it. So they finished filming the documentary and then he was getting B-roll footage. So the whole team had left. They were done with the interviews. They were done with everything. It was just like Andy, one camera, and they were getting some extra footage to shove in there. And Nicholas Sparks gets a call that his dad died and then begs Andy Cohen to not include it. And Andy does. And then Nicholas does not include it. And then he's talking about it. He's like, I felt like in that moment, I had to just like man to man not share that vulnerable moment. And then years later, Nicholas Sparks is writing a memoir and thanks Andy Cohen for leaving that out of the documentary series. And Andy Cohen is like, I wish I had included it.
Well, he asks Dan Rathers or whoever, he asks whoever his producer was, what do you think? And they said, if it had been hard-hitting news, yeah, you got to put in what you find. But for a feature, it's not that fucking deep, which is, okay, sorry to bring up this bitch again, but Katie Couric, do you remember what she left out that she regretted?
No.
She had interviewed Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I guess I'm blowing my own stack here. I go back and listen to the episode, but she was interviewing Ruth Bader Ginsburg and she asked RBG what she thought about Colin Kaepernick taking a knee. And RBJ says something quite dismissive and like, she was not a fan of Colin Kaepernick. She thought that man should be standing up and respecting his country. And Katie knew how that would read to the liberal fans of RBG and cut it to preserve RBG's image. And she's like, yeah, I guess like my job isn't to edit to protect somebody's image. My job is to like share the news as it comes in.
If only the liberals had known to be mad at RBG before she couldn't hear us anymore. Anyway, I do think this one is interesting to me because it wouldn't have affected anything except Nicholas Sparks's grieving process. It wasn't really like for anything. You know what I mean? We're just getting to know Nicholas Sparks in this documentary moment. And so to not include it is just like a nice thing to do. And the fact that he's like, I don't know, I wish I had included it, kind of like, I don't know how I feel. Like to this day or at the time of writing, he's like, I don't know how I feel about the fact that I didn't include it. I don't know if I stand by that. And it is very interesting as a foreshadowing to the housewives to me, because it is not hard-hitting news. It's not that important of information, especially in terms of like forming your opinion about someone or for anything. Like it really is just like respect for the subject.
So then he talks about after he went over that 48 hours, he comes back to the CBS morning show, which has gone from like 3rd to 9th. Nobody will watch it. It's really pathetic. They're competing with the Today Show. And they're like, well, what if we had a live studio audience the way Katie Couric looks out at people on the plaza? And so they try to get an audience in the studio, but nobody will show up. So then they just have to fill it with like interns and stuff. It's so pathetic. They have one big idea, which is that they're going to get Mariah to launch her new CD when they're launching their new anchor, who's Brian Gumbel, who you may remember from the Katie Couric show.
And then Mariah Carey backs out because they won't close down Fifth Avenue for her.
Not that they won't, they can't.
Yeah.
They have no power here. And he's like, it was so stressful that I started getting hemorrhoids in his butthole. I don't know where else you could get them.
So then he gets a job offer at a network called Trio that's just on DirecTV. He takes it because he's like, I think if I stay here, I'm going to get fired. Things are not going well.
Yeah. And so he gets to work under someone named Lauren Zalaznick.
I will say the other thing when he thinks he might be getting fired, he's like, I'd never considered that my career could go bad. Like I'd just been climbing and climbing and climbing. And what would I do if they fired me? Move back to St. Louis and just work at the canning factory? And it's just like, Andy, there are other jobs. Like he did just get another job offer to run shit at Trio. Like that obviously came down the pipe. But also this idea that if you face one career hiccup post-graduation.
Imagine if we had given up when our first podcast failed. We would have never gotten to that second podcast that failed.
I'm just saying if you climb from news clerk to senior producer and then you get fired as senior producer after 10 years.
Well, not fired if your company goes under.
Yeah, if the show gets canceled as senior producer, you're not like unhireable forever. I wonder if there's ever been a time where he genuinely, like things weren't going really well. Because as soon as he started to hit a slight road bump and thinking like, wait a second, might things not go swimmingly? He got his job offer at Trio.
So he goes to Trio, which is trying to become like a gay channel. They have Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, and they have this other show called Boy Meets Boy and another one called Gay Weddings, but it's not to be mixed up with Logo, the actual gay show.
The gay network. And then Trio gets absorbed by
NBC.
Yeah.
Universal, and it gets become Bravoed. It gets become
Bravo.
So he's like the head of production and development. So now he gets into this chapter called Perfect Pitch, where he cleverly mixes 3 stories together that all have the word pitch in them. One is about how pitches work, and it's actually kind of interesting.
He talks about the pitching of a TV show and how it works and how a show will come in, like an idea will come in, and then there's like executives that will then develop that idea.
And he basically is just trying to say no show in the pitch room has ever been like so obviously the golden ticket. Like there are so many iterations of things, and even shows that go on to be hits, the first season isn't all that. And before the season, there's development. And before the development, there's the pitch. And so just, there's a lot of steps.
He was actually pitched a TV show by one Candy Spelling. He was flown out to go visit her massive Spelling manor. And I just thought that was an interesting one.
And I guess she sat there and just said all the things she would and would not do on TV, which I love. She's like, yes, I'll let you do a TV show with me, but not in this way.
Yeah.
Obviously, it did not happen. He says the weirdest pitch he ever got was from Sybil Shepherd. Do you guys know her? I bet she has a memoir.
Oh, yeah, I bet she does.
I'm not interested in it, but I bet she does.
And she just started like taking her clothes off.
It was about her and her crazy friend. He said later it went on to be the show Sybil, which is a sitcom and was successful, he says. But yeah, they just started being like, are you Jewish? We love that about you. We think you're so great. And then they're like, are you hot? Can I take my shoes off? And they're like, we'll take our shirts off if you do. And he was like, okay. And then she goes, what if we took our pants off? And he like freaks out because he's not wearing underwear. So finally he's like, I can't. And they're like, why? Why can't you take your pants off? And they're in a boardroom with other people.
And finally he goes, because I'm not wearing underwear. But I don't know why he didn't just say,
because it's a business meeting. The way that he's like, okay, are you happy? Like as if that was like the final hard out of the game and not because of like basic human decorum. I like was trying to think of why you would explain to someone you can't take off your pants at a business meeting. And I'm like, some questions have no further explanation. It's just the question reiterated with a period. Why can't you take off your pants at a business meeting? You can't take off your pants at a business meeting. That's why. You just can't. Sometimes there's things because I told you so.
You're just not supposed to do it. Even if you're wearing underwear that
Even
day,
if you want
you
to.
shouldn't take off your pants.
Even if you desire it, you may not.
You shouldn't have taken your shirt off.
And now he's like, well, I always wear underwear. And I'm like, okay, Andy, draw a boundary for yourself. Underoos or no, to say my pants stay on. It's a work day.
And then he talks about throwing the first pitch out at a St. Louis Cardinals game and how he did a really good job.
Well,
he said he didn't do a really good job, but he said he didn't do a notably bad job. And just by not failing, he succeeded. There are no perfect pitches. Just try not to hit the dirt.
I have to tell you guys something. If any of my listeners, and I know some of you are destined for greatness, are going to throw out a first pitch, the advice he got constantly, which was true, is do it from the front of the mound. You will be surprised and shocked at how high the pitcher's mound is, and it'll throw off your game. You must walk to the front where the grass meets the dirt so that you'll be on level, quite literally level, playing field.
Ain't that the truth? So bravo. Brava, what a network, you know?
Mm-hmm.
He really gets into the ins and outs of how he got to his position at Bravo, but also a lot of just like stuff about how crazy the development of some Bravo shows was. Like at first, Padma Lakshmi wouldn't do Top Chef.
Can I tell you, he's like, you wouldn't believe how often we're in a situation where we're 3-4 days away from going into production and we don't have a host for a show. And I was like, oh my God, I need to get in touch with Bravo Andy, because if you're desperate, that could be my in. It really did make me think like timing is everything. I need to just be sending emails.
That's so true.
Like right now, I need to send an email and be like, do you need a host? I'm chatty.
We like chat all the time. Watch what happens here live.
Watch this space live.
So how did Andy become the Bravo Andy we know today?
I actually loved this explanation because it was
exactly what happened.
Yeah, but sometimes people answer a question. They're like, well, you know, I was sitting there with my agent and I had just gotten my first, third, and fourth offer on the screenplay. And I was like, how did we get the agent?
Yeah, so we know how he rose to becoming a producer. And then he became a producer at Trio, which then merged and became Bravo. And so then at Bravo, apparently he was just like a chatty little gossip about all of the shows. And he would always email Lauren, who was his boss, about what was going on in the gossip circuit within the shows. And then she was like, this should be a blog on our website.
I wonder if she was like, hey, what if instead of sending these emails to me, you put them online?
No, I think she's a very talented executive. And so she
knows talent when she sees it.
She said, I love reading these emails. I bet everyone would love reading these emails.
So he had created the show called Battle of the Network Reality Stars, which was based on a TV show he loved, which was the first ever crossover he saw growing up as Battle of the Network Stars or something, where like celebrities from TV competed at tug of rope or whatever, tug of war.
And so then they did one with reality stars.
And that show actually bombed and sucked. And he had been warned by the network president that nobody was going to watch this show. And sure enough, nobody watched it. But what came out of it was this like little bootleg after the fact web series he did called Watch What Happens Live.
Yeah. So he started doing this blog. And then for the blog, they were like, what if you shot segments that you hosted like for after the episodes? And so then it became a web series called Watch What Happens Live. And then Watch What Happens Live, like over the course of the next couple of years, became an every night.
First, it became like a more often thing because as their shows blew up, Project Runway, Top Chef, Queer Eye, Workout, Sheer Genius, Flipping Out, etc., like they needed people to go and kind of talk about what was happening. I guess as reality TV took off and got fodder, they were like, well, why don't we keep the fodder in-house?
Yes. In 2008, Watch What Happens Live moved to Rock Center and broadcast as the online companion to Bravo's final season of Project Runway.
Something interesting, though, was that this guy, Michael Davies, who had produced Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, was the one who came to the network and said, I have an idea to make this little web series a full-time primetime show. Let me produce it for you.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that somebody outside of the network had to come in and be like, I think there's something here.
Yeah. And so then it like starts becoming more cocktail party vibes, more Andy's Den energy.
But they wanted to keep it very like off the cuff, casual.
Yeah. And then they started doing it at midnight. And then finally they moved it to 11 p.m. Had the show failed at midnight, I promise you it would have been canceled. But because there's one thing I know from my job as a network executive, sometimes no matter how much you personally love a show, if it's a wound and bleeding, you have to put it down. Hosting a live, interactive, televised cocktail party from my den is as fun as it looks and maybe more. So basically, he got there just like right place, right time, right energy.
And I like that he's like, look, so out of my biggest flop ever came my biggest soar. So don't be afraid to fail. Just make sure you're learning from the failures. And then they say, is there anything that was more successful than you thought it would be? And he says he thought Top Chef was going to bomb because he's like, who would want to watch TV about food they can't taste or smell or understand? And it turned out like a lot of people.
Turns out everybody. But I do think it's very interesting with him that he is like a deeply ambitious person, but I think that he's always got his eye like with his wonky eyes. He's got one eye on the ball and one eye on the prize.
As I reread it even just now when he's like, oh, this guy Michael came to the network to say, what if we made it a full-time thing? I wonder if he had known Michael. Michael goes, oh, I would produce that. Like, let's pitch it together. Like, yeah. I do wonder what's happening. I think something brilliant about Andy is he keeps it casual, but behind the scenes, he's moving like a fucking, like a rhinoceros who's actually one of the faster animals in the world.
Yeah, but I also think
you wouldn't guess it.
The two eyes going every which way. Like, I think on one hand, like you can't deny that the job that he is assigned to, he is going to do that job really well. But then with the other
100%,
he's also like looking around to say like, what else can we pull in here? Like, what else can I achieve? I think, I mean, obviously he did an incredible job just as a behind the scenes producer at Bravo.
But yeah, and also at that same time, we left out that because he was a producer for this entertainment show, he became like the go-to speaker honor of things. He became like a talking head. He was being interviewed by Entertainment Tonight. He was being interviewed by Page Six. Like anywhere he could go where he could give a soundbite to television, he would. So he was like racking up TV credits and becoming an on-air personality on the side.
Yeah, like as soon as he was given an inch, he said, okay, how many miles can I fucking run right now as fast as I can?
Why do Bravo celebrities who have been sacked keep popping back up again like whack-a-moles? Bravo is like the mob. Once you're in, you're in. I used to love when characters who'd long left All My Children reappeared years later, and I'd forgive them for their sins of the past years.
I mean, he then goes on to talk about how reality TV displaced soap operas in many ways.
And he feels bad about that. But he's also like, they did, but they didn't. I mean, there's always going to be a vacuum. So then he gets into the housewives and he spends a lot of the up top pages talking about all of their dogs and how obsessed he was with Jiggy and how that sent Jill Zarin over the edge. If you're not a Real Housewives fan, Jill Zarin is like an OG New York housewife who got fired because she went into a fight with Bethany. Andy and Bravo took Bethany's side and they kind of cut Jill. And Jill is like a psychopathic person who's obsessed with pretending that she doesn't care, but it's like desperate to be famous. And I have to say, she comes off so pathetic and bad in this book. So she's like offended that her dog Ginger isn't as favored as Jiggy. She makes this like fake Twitter account for Ginger and keeps tweeting at Andy about it and being like, why don't you love me? Why don't you love me? And then she like brings Ginger to the set. And then she like sends an email demanding to know why there isn't equal favoritism about the dogs. And then she sends like a full oil painting of Ginger dressed up as Queen Elizabeth. And finally Andy's like, okay, I'll hang this up. This is pretty absurd. And then when she got fired, she asked for the painting back. Like, I mean, she just sounds crazy.
That is insane. And so then we get to the development of the housewives. So at first it was this show called Behind the Gates of these like women in Orange County in this gated community who are full of boobs and craziness.
So what's interesting is this guy, Scott Dunlap. I think if you watch the show, his name pops up. He's like an EP or something. But he was an advertising executive from a gated community. And he took the initial footage of the women and he sent that footage to a production company who then took that footage and sent it to Bravo to get a development deal. So at which point, Bravo then pays the production company to essentially pitch a full pilot.
So it became The Real Housewives because Desperate Housewives was the biggest show in the US at that time. And they're like, okay, well, what if we capitalize on that and call it The Real Housewives? They like kept on going in and something wasn't working. They kept on going in.
So they did 8 episodes and they were like, I don't know, it's just too disjointed and we don't understand. And he's like, one of the big problems is you can't tell these women apart. They all look the same. And he's like, there wasn't any depth and nothing made sense because they were saying things in their interviews and then acting a different way. And there was like no congruity. So he was like, we either scrap it or we go back in and retry. So they actually went back in and like reshot everything.
And I think it's very interesting that the way this came about, when you're like, how does someone create a show like The Real Housewives? It was not really anyone's idea. It was like 5 ideas that built upon each other and had to be recrafted several times to become the mess we know it as today and the art we know it as today.
I mean, he is quick to admit like when he was wrong, they were going to call it The Real Housewives. And then his executive said, no, make it of the OC in case we want to franchise it. And he's like, that sounds so clunky. And this is so awful. Why would we ever make a second series? And he's like, and thank God she did.
Because boy, oh boy, would his number of properties look different.
So then they did New York and it was hard to cast New York. The originals were Jill, Ramona, and Alex McCord. And it was originally actually the pilot called Manhattan Moms that were going to pit Alex McCord and Jill Zarin against each other. And then they were like, well, why don't we reformat it as this new show? We're doing the series. And then they added Ramona. And then Jill found Bethany. And then they got Countess Luann.
He talks a lot about uncovering Bethany like a diamond in the rough. And I would be so interested to hear how he would write about it now.
Yeah, because at this time they were like best of friends.
Yeah.
Bethany didn't even want to do it. Her boyfriend pitched her for it and said it would be a really good idea. That was Jason number 1. Not even the Jason of today's Jason. Not even the man she'd eventually be divorced from, Jason.
He also originally didn't even want Bethany because she'd already been on a reality show and he thought it was stupid for her to keep popping up on reality shows. He didn't want his reality show to look like the sloppy seconds of someone else's reality show.
Which is so funny because now they have full on like soap opera actresses like Eileen Davidson.
And he talks about the way that people who don't resonate with one franchise will all of a sudden be obsessed with another franchise. They all bring something completely different to the table. Then he talks about casting New Jersey and Atlanta. If you haven't figured it out yet, there's nothing I like better than sitting atop a powder keg in a room full of loose cannons. That's why I love my job.
And then he gets really into the DC franchise, which is so funny because in this day and age, like, who even gives a shit anymore? But there was this one season of Real Housewives of DC, and the big scandal was that one of the couples in it, Michelle and Tarek, had broken into a White House dinner for India. Like, they were welcoming somebody from India. They had claimed that they had forgotten their invites, and they still somehow got in. And then somehow Bravo was blamed for it. They were like, you guys egged them on. They only did it to impress you. Which is, I'm sorry. Any reason you break into the White House, it doesn't really matter what your reason is. I don't care if you did it to impress Jodie Foster. You know what I mean? Like, you did what you did. But the other thing is, everybody was saying it was so vile. It was abhorrent. People hated them. People were really like out to get the Salahis. That's the name of that couple. And I'm like, okay, what did they do that was so bad? They broke into a party. Big whoop. I feel like if you're going to be mad at someone, be mad at the Secret Service. We're paying them gazillions of dollars in tax money and they can't even like check an RSVP list.
That's how I feel. It's so funny to look back on some of these scandals now and think about who we're mad at.
I guess I am like, yeah, I get why it's bad to break into the White House. But once again, their intentions were pure. They were just there to network. Is that not the most American thing in the world? To go to a party you weren't invited and try to hobnob your way to the top?
But it's also like, if you're breaking into the White House, the people who failed is the White House.
Yeah, isn't it the White House's responsibility to keep its legs closed? It is so funny to have a list of people that are allowed in and then immediately be like, you're not on the list? No problem. The list was a joke anyway.
So then they're doing Beverly Hills, and this is when it's really just like going crazy. When they do Beverly Hills, they have agents, they have managers, they have publicists trying to get women cast on the show. It's no longer a production company trying to figure it out for themselves. They have people begging to be a part of this franchise.
He's like, at first I thought, why would we do Beverly Hills? We just did the OC. What's the difference? And he's like, oh, and the difference is that these bitches were rich. He's like, we'd never had true money on the show before. These ladies were rich.
Adrienne Maloof. So then he gets into Beverly Hills and the Taylor Armstrong sitch, which I don't really know about, but you've told me about it.
So basically what happened is Taylor Armstrong is on. She claims her husband's very rich. Something seems up. And then season 2, something is happening and nobody can tell what it is. And it turns out off camera, they were having conversations where she was confiding in her castmates that she was in an abusive relationship. That then on camera, she was not explicitly denying, but like would make everybody go out on double dates with her husband and act like everything was great. When meanwhile, off camera, they knew that she was in a very dangerous situation, that she was planning on leaving. And then she was getting on camera and she was drinking a lot. You could tell something was up. And so finally, Camille Grammer kind of calls her on it and she says, we haven't been saying that he hits you, but now we have. And then I think she leaves him and the finale is a party at Sir for her leaving him. 3 days after they stopped filming, he killed himself with a suitcase full of unpaid bills. And apparently a clip that did not make it to air just randomly because of the narrative's sake. There's a dinner where Mohammed Hadid, you may know of Bella and Gigi's dad, tells Lisa, like, oh, that girl, Taylor Armstrong's husband, Randy or whatever his name is, Russell, he stole $15 million from me. So he was like a fraudster to the top. He kills himself, leaves a suitcase full of unpaid bills. They're in horrible financial ruin. The next day, his business partner kills himself. But of course, now there's this question of like, what is it ethical to do on TV? We've now filmed this whole season about this woman leaving this man. And before it came out what had really happened, the public was kind of blaming the show and saying TV led him to kill himself, when in fact, I think it was his own wrongdoings and possibly the being outed on TV, but I think he was in deep shit.
I think he was in deep shit. So Andy talks a lot about, in like the castings of these shows, the amount of people who will be like, will I get audited if I do this show?
Well, no, he said he had only heard that in New Jersey.
Oh, okay.
He said...
But in New Jersey, he says it came up more than once.
He goes, it kept being like, and what about this legally? And what about this? And that Teresa like kept agreeing to do the show and then not, and then coming back and then not. So ultimately, Taylor was one who was like, I actually want to air it as is. I want people to see what I was going through. Like maybe it'll help somebody else get out of their situation. They went back and edited out any like jokes about dying. Like apparently Taylor's buying lingerie and somebody's like, oh, your husband's going to die when he sees you in that. So they cut that stuff out. But he said it was very stressful.
So these types of things, I think this was very interesting because it was a domestic abuse storyline. And at the end of the day, Taylor Armstrong was still
the victim
of abuse. So it's tough because people are, of course, going to call it exploitation. And I think that it's a very interesting question because it circles the drain on reality TV and the housewives in general, because I think that there are examples of exploitation and there are examples of things that I think teeter ethically.
Yeah, because I think some people argue, I think like Andy Cohen argues, where else are you going to see the real lives of women in their 50s and 60s? Like who else is giving menopausal women airtime and acknowledging their complex interiority? And I would say for a lot of the scenarios, that's not super true. I mean, I don't think you're lifting up Sonia Morgan's complex interiority when we watch her blackout drunk every day.
Like, I don't think with the couple that snuck into the White House, I don't think Bravo was involved in the decision process at all. I think that they were a delusional duo. And the crux of the DC storyline is people and what they'll do to get close to power.
And I mean, and the thing is, the kind of person who's lying to get near the White House is lying to get on TV. Yeah, that's the exact same person to me.
Yeah.
They're all fraudsters.
But then also you have Salt Lake City and you have the amount of people who are renting houses and putting on a facade to project the narrative of a TV show. This is like separate from the Taylor Armstrong stuff. But at what point is it the responsibility of Bravo to like not cast people, like to do better research about what type of person are you putting on TV? But then of course, the type of person who does crazy shit to get on TV is going to make good TV. And at the end of the day, I guess a reality show cannot be a moral compass.
So then, I mean, the rest of this is kind of just fodder. He gets into a whole chapter on reunions where he like actually just quotes some of the reunions. This is where I really can't stand reality TV books.
He talks about the most iconic moments at reunions.
And his insight, sometimes it's crazy and sometimes it's not.
And I guess, okay, this is the thing with Andy and this book is that I am very impressed by him just like working hard for decades and networking and schmoozing and vibing to the exact place that he's always wanted to be. Like, that's amazing. And I think he's very happy with his life. Like, I think he loves his job more than anyone in the world, honestly. And I think that's awesome. But to sit there and say like, well, the original purpose of this and like the actual reason for this, I'm like, you're making these bitches scream at each other. And that's fine. But like, you don't need to sit there and be like, the truth, the crux, the emotional core
What I do
here.
believe is at the beginning, he thought friendship breakups would end the show. Like when Bethany and Jill broke up, he said to them, like, don't do this. People watch because they like your friendship. And I think it'll be worse for you. And he was right for Jill, but he didn't understand that the ratings would go up. And like Nene and Kim, he was like, people don't want to watch you fight. They want to watch you be friends. But
they really want to watch you fight.
Anyway, you guys know I can't stand just like recapping shit we already saw on TV, which is, I guess, why I had a hard time with Kitty Couric's book. And then he does the worst sin of all. He gets to host a fake reunion with the women of Saturday Night Live, and he gives like the full script. So here's an idea. If you want to watch funny women be funny instead of reading it, why don't you watch it? I will not indulge. And then we get into when he got canceled. So basically he was in his heyday before he really knew how famous he would ever be. And before he even considered himself famous, he was doing all these little TV gigs and he was here and there and he was an executive producer, but he was more like known, I think, as behind the scenes guy who would come and talk about it. So he was asked to talk on Morning Joe on that guy's TV show about the Oscars. And I guess a bunch of kids had sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
And he prefaces it with saying there was a different Oscars performance of Somewhere Over the Rainbow that was the most magical thing I've ever seen. And these kids were so lame.
He made fun of the kids. And it turned out those were public school kids from Staten Island and God for fucking bid. And so it was the first time it had ever really been canceled. And it's huge and it's everywhere. And he's getting tweeted at and he's getting yelled at. Somebody yelled at him at a Knicks game.
He kept on having to be like, no, I went to public school. I love public school kids. And I don't understand why public school was the crux of this conversation.
Too. I love that they're like private school kids. Yeah, shoot them in the face. I mean, fair enough. Shoot me in my stupid fucking face.
Did they think he was saying like if those kids had been privately educated, I would have liked to see them?
That's how the headlines work, though. They're like, it can't just be kids. It's like poor kids. Are they poor? I don't know, but they go to public school. So you tell me.
So Andy Cohen made fun of public school kids.
And then he apologized and it wasn't enough. So he had to apologize again.
No one was airing his apology. They just kept being mad at him. But then finally, there's a video of the public school chorus teacher reading Andy Cohen's apology to the kids. And the teacher makes fun of Andy. And so then everyone turns on the teacher.
This did make me laugh. It just goes to show how preposterous some of these scandals are. So, you know, it's getting all this press. The Times Week in Review put my quote between one from Gaddafi saying, all my people love me, and John Galliano's I love Hitler anti-Semitic rant. But I'm just like, okay, it clearly is not as bad as saying you love Hitler. And it's not as bad as being a literal dictator.
It just is something stupid that he said.
It's so funny to be like, those kids kind of suck, huh? And people are like, well, to the gulag with you.
Why was anyone happy to see kids singing at the Oscars? They shouldn't have been there.
And a night where we're celebrating adults.
I can't stand a children's chorus.
When I think about it today, I have to laugh, albeit ruefully. The Oscars, Over the Rainbow, a kids choir, bad outfits, and me, all wrapped in an Oz-themed tornado that made me wish a house would fall from the sky and smush me. Could there possibly be a gayer scandal? Good news, both John Galliano and Andy Cohen are back from the dead, reaping their rewards. So cancel culture doesn't exist.
And then the book ends with him meeting Susan Lucci a bunch more times. And he ruminates on whether or not he helped to kill soap operas. And he goes, no, they would have died. And I think this was like the less effective part of the book to me is I thought that he had a lot of really interesting insights about news production, about working in reality, about his line of work in general. But I think with like the ethics of reality TV, because he loves it so much, like he loves what he does and he has no qualms about it, it seems. So whenever he has to like kind of skip up to the line and like discuss whether or not what he's doing is good or ethical or whatever, he so obviously thinks what he's doing is awesome that it just feels annoying to me.
Yeah, I mean, he can't be honest about, and
it's fine. It is what he's doing. It almost would be worse if he was like, yeah, what I'm doing is actually pure evil, but I love making millions of dollars and living in the Hamptons. It's worse for me if he hates what he's doing.
Yeah, let him lie.
Let him lie to himself. I don't even know if he's lying. He just is not actually having these conversations because he can't, because if he did, I think it would be a bit upsetting.
Well, it's so funny. We just read that article for the Patreon where they did a big but they did a big profile of him, I think in The Cut or New York Magazine. And he quotes how like Gloria Steinem has said this is like an affront to women. He's like, yeah, but other people love it. So I don't know. Who's the foremost scholar on feminism? Probably not Gloria. Probably my friends that are staying at my Hamptons house right now.
Probably Sarah Jessica Parker.
He's like, Teresa Giudice says it's good for women.
Sarah Jessica Parker is also a columnist.
Yeah, she's got some words of wisdom.
You know, I think he has a lot of good insights. I think the one thing is it annoys me when he pretends to be introspective about reality TV because he isn't.
Well, he's like, I've thought about it and I decided everything I'm doing is perfect.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so then he talks about what happened after the book came out. It's mostly his mom saying, why did you make it seem like I'm always yapping and screaming? I'm not yapping and screaming. He says, yes, you are.
And then he got to go on the Howard Stern show and he was like, I was ready to talk about anything, but all he wanted to know was how much money I made. And that's one secret I'll never tell. XOXO.
Andy Cohen.
And I'm like, oh my God, how much money are you making, Andy, you sick little fuck? Tell us.
So much money.
Tell us, bitch. Tell us.
It actually makes me madder about those stupid Andy Cohen Diaries books he does because
I'm like, you don't need the money and you don't need the fame. Why are you just shitting out shot?
Yeah. Stop shitting your shot.
See, whereas I said this was better than a Seth Rogen book, I think those diary books would be even worse.
Much worse. But I think it's very interesting. You know, he's a guy who loves what he's doing. And I like that he is happy. Oh, except I forgot that I'm mad at him. Never mind. I'm not happy that he's happy. Go fuck yourself, Andy. Claire, how many wormtinis would you have with Andrew Cohen? It's also interesting because he is billed as Andrew Cohen in a lot because when he first started working at CBS, he wrote Andrew on the application to look more official.
I have to be honest, I would be the bartender on his Watch What Happens Live show.
Oh, me too.
And I have to be honest, I would have a couple more. I like him.
But I would tell him that I'm mad at him.
Yeah.
Because I think he'd appreciate that.
I don't, but
I would Andy Cohen. I'd tell him exactly what I think.
I think we could do more good universally by having a TV show than we could by giving one dude a piece of our mind that will not change his. That's the mindset I'm adopting so that we can know even a modicum of success eventually.
What if you and I good cop, bad cop to Andy Cohen? And instead he just gave you a TV show and had me killed. How fertile would you say this soil was?
2.5. I actually think if you wanted to read it on the beach, you're getting exactly what you wanted. I assume the people who wanted something out of this don't want for much. Yeah. But I do think this is one of the few books where I'm like, this is delivering what you thought you were getting.
I wonder what more there is.
I think that's a very good question. I wish I could have a biography of him. I'm interested in his way of moving up in the world. And I wish I was more like it.
Me too.
All right. See you later.